Issues in Science and the Public. Biblical inerrancy, an inevitable barrier to the public acceptance of science. Focus in most literature is on the public understanding of science, but not so much on the public acceptance of science. However, there's one major exception, that is evolutionary biology. When you Google search or scholar search for a public acceptance of science, evolutionary biology comes up time and time again. The public acceptance of evolutionary theory is a big problem. The result of testing is showing us that individuals are passing in their coursework materials on exactly what evolution is, but it appears that the vast majority of our students still don't accept it by the time they graduate from high school. Now, why is this a major factor? Why is evolutionary biology an exception to the rule? It is possibly because other sciences are just not as threatening to religious sensitivities as evolutionary biology is. Science in general is well accepted, but with exceptions. Many conflicts arise from curriculum discussing human evolution. These conflicts continue to interfere with the public understanding of science, and more so the public acceptance of science, in particular the public acceptance of human evolution. The literature that we will focus on will be on human evolution, as this is a major issue affecting the public understanding of science and the public acceptance of science. According to a study by Joseph O. Baker, 2012, out of East Tennessee State University, a national survey was conducted in which he reported that 69% of the respondents believe that religion and science can be compatible. And this is viewed as significant in his report. Yet we do see that a study done by Miller in 2006, as we'll see on the next slide, showed that evolution, which is science, is disbelieved by 60% of the American population. The latest study conducted, called the ARIS study in 2008, showed that 76% of Americans identify as Christian. Based on those numbers, doesn't there appear to still be some kind of incompatibility here? And so, as you can see here in the Miller study, that in the United States, 40% accept evolution, whereas the remaining 60% are not sure or they don't believe it's true. Now, coming back to Joseph's study, if the survey question was worded differently, would it have revealed a different result? And throughout this course, we have learned that dependent upon the way the question is asked will greatly influence the kind of responses that you get. So in Joseph's study, since it pretty much focuses on whether or not they view science and religion as compatible, without first qualifying what the actual definition of science actually is or what it means to them, then of course we may get different results. Sure, people may think certain things are compatible before they actually look at them. So here's an example. If the question were asked this way: biological evolution states that humans evolved over millions of years from ape-like ancestors. Do you see a conflict between what science presents concerning human origins and your religious faith? More than likely the results would be vastly different than what we received from Joseph in his study. Now, previous polling data that we reviewed earlier, that data kind of hints that between 60 to 75% of the respondents would probably answer yes, there is a conflict. So thus there does indeed appear to be a conflict between science and religion, despite what Joseph's study may have tried to provide us. Mano Singham, the author of The Science and Religion Wars, argues that the barriers to the public understanding of science and the public acceptance of science are not the theological and scientific issues at hand necessarily, but rather they are the public discourses surrounding them, the nature of them, the vitriol between the two groups. Singham discusses that these may perhaps be differing spheres of knowledge that are being forced to intersect. And he brings up Stephen Jay Gould as an example of one who was an advocate that of the two separate worlds idea, that as long as they pretty much stay neatly in their own little boxes, we won't have any problem. And Singham separates these two major oppositional groups. He places one into a group he calls the elite religious group, and the other he calls the elite science or the elite secular type groups. And these groups, he claims, are the loudest of the groups. They are the ones who are making the most media, causing the most problems, so to speak. And those in the middle are kind of squeezed out of the conversation. And he thinks that is a travesty. And he says that these two groups, in his view, may be what's causing some of the barriers to the public understanding of science as well as the public acceptance of science, because we keep getting two loud groups polarizing these groups and trying to make it appear as if you only have two options. And he said that this has become more of a political effort more so than actually something dealing more with philosophical or education or things of that nature. And it, I see that view. I understand that view. Okay, I thought I'd take a moment to talk about the two worlds problem since I brought it up very quickly, and also perhaps bring up something that Singa mentioned about the elite groups in Clash. Nowhere in history can you see that even more prominently than the 1925, or really 1924 and 1925 Scopes trial, in which John Scopes was convicted for teaching evolution. Although no one actually heard him say it, allegedly, at least is what he says. He actually skipped that part about evolution. But it makes me wonder, is even though there really wasn't much discussion about it during this particular time when John Scopes was demonized by his peers and convicted and tried for this, makes me wonder. Singham argues that it's the way that they're having the conversation. I think that the Scopes trial shows that it's really much deeper than that. It has nothing really to even do with how they're dialoguing with each other. I think there's something deeper, and we'll look more into that as we progress through the slides. Next slide. Researcher Darren Sherkat, 2011, conducted a multivariate analysis on data retrieved from a 2006 General Social Survey, which polled 1,780 people and included a 13-point examination of scientific facts and reasoning. The data led him to conclude that those respondents which leaned more toward religious fundamentalism, that is, biblical inerrancy, were significantly impacted concerning their level of basic scientific literacy. David Masci is a senior research fellow with the Pew Forum, and in 2007 he reviewed data coming from various sources, one of which was Time magazine. And he reports, quote, "When asked what they would do if scientists were to disprove a particular religious belief, nearly two-thirds, 64% of people say they would continue to hold to what their religion teaches rather than accept the contrary scientific finding." Indeed, in a May 2000 Gallup poll, only 14% of those who say they do not believe in evolution cite lack of evidence as the main reason underpinning their views. More people cite their belief in Jesus, 19%, God, 16%, or religion generally, 16%, as their reason for rejecting Darwin's theory. So again, two-thirds say that no matter what the science tells them, they're going to keep believing. And this 64% reminds me of the Joseph Roberts study, in which 69% of the respondents stated that they did not find any issues with compatibility between religion and science. It could very well be possible that there was no compatibility issues because they did not see that there wasn't a problem in the first place, that they knew that their position would not change regardless. So again, I think that these responses reflect once again that the surveys depend, or the results of the survey depend a lot on what type of question and how the question is asked. In 2008, Dr. Carvalho and her colleagues published Seeing May Not Mean Believing, examining students understandings and beliefs in evolution. Her study covered ninth grade students enrolled into 3 biology classes and collected data concerning their opinions about the nature of science and evolution before and after the course. The results revealed that students' beliefs did not change during the course of the instruction. Why are they rejecting what is being told to them in school? Next slide. Why are Americans rejecting evolutionary science? Why are they not accepting evolutionary science? In effect, not accepting science. Well, as the 2007 Gallup poll has shown us, 14% of the respondents state that the lack of evidence is the primary reason that the respondents stated that they doubt the veracity of evolution. But where are they getting that from? Why would they think that there isn't any evidence? Well, creationist websites provide a lot of misinformation out there concerning evolution, and this might be what's fueling this position. But what is the solution to that? If the lack of evidence is the problem, most assuredly, we should just show them the evidence. Well, again, unfortunately, the data states that 64% say that, well, evidence is irrelevant anyway. If that is the case, then we're back to square one. So will education even help? Next slide. Opinion: the reward of heaven and the afterlife. Well, as we can see so far in the studies mentioned, it appears that there are other reasons why individuals are doubting the veracity of the scientific evidence for human evolution. The concept of the afterlife is strong, culturally, personally, emotionally, traditionally, theologically, and of course, philosophically. Many Christians cannot afford to have anything jeopardize going to heaven and not being with their particular God. As we saw, despite scientific evidence, many of the Christians polled would continue to believe in their belief, even if it contradicts fact. So this is not an issue of reason, logic, evidence. This is an issue of maintaining the status quo of religious dogma. God cannot be wrong. Thus, the science must be wrong, right? Next slide. Well, appealing to the gut. Minsu Ha et al. 2012 published a study in which his team delved into the cognitive science side to discover the roots of why we have so much rejection of evolution. Ha argues that the studies surrounding this issue all have conflicting data, as we have noticed, and believes that cognitive science shows us that what feels right tends to be where people tend to go when it comes to accepting a particular position. However, the study also did show some statistically relevant values that religion and culture do still influence acceptance of evolution as well. One could argue that those values and religions are the reasons why people have certain feels right feelings after being indoctrinated, inculcated so long in a particular ways. Some things might feel right, some things might feel wrong, but I know that that is one criticism that Ha will receive. Next slide. Facing the facts. There doesn't appear to be an easy solution to this problem as far as what I've researched. Some science does indeed clash with some religious views. This does not appear something that will change, especially provided that the fundamentalist worldview maintains their literal stance theologically. Also, though well-intentioned, those groups which seek to appease some religious groups by informing them that there is no conflict are not really telling the entire story. It appears what happens is that some are using an absolute claim when we see evidentially that there really is a conflict between science and religion. If not science in general, at least we can say with certainty that particular sciences definitely clash with some religious perspectives. As we see from the studies in the previous slide that there appears to be an eternal conflict between science and religion. Based on the studies presented, it does appear that as long as science is found not to be threatening, that science can be accepted. But can this be done? Can we reduce the threat? Well, human evolution is a science that is threatening to fundamentalists and even some liberal Christians, as many believers still accept a literal Garden of Eden story. Fundamentalism and biblical inerrancy will always conflict with evolutionary models of human origin. So one solution to this then, if there is a solution, is someone's perspective will have to change. Either the elite scientists, as Singham argues, or the elite religious person would have to change their position for this to work in some way. And that's what we'll look at next. Next slide. Can we change the fundamentalist mindset? Probably not. Should we try? Are the religious fundamentalists really that much of a threat to the public acceptance of science? The studies unfortunately reveal that fundamentalism is a threat to the public acceptance of science. Some have argued we should simply just leave them be, that they will disappear on their own without resistance, that somehow it will resolve itself. However, we have seen push after push to have disclaimers put in biology textbooks to include intelligent design or creationism. We've also seen movements to remove the term evolution from textbooks or place warning stickers in textbooks as well, that somehow something about evolution is questionable. So how can we get the public to accept evolutionary science? Well, we need allies in the field that can help the public accept pus and pos, and that is Dr. Kenneth Miller. In the Kitzmiller versus Dover case that was mentioned earlier, Dr. Kenneth Miller's book was under fire. His textbook biology was being accused of being laced with Darwinism, and religious groups wanted it removed, or they wanted it balanced with creationist or intelligent design ideology. Next slide. Again, one thing that is clear is that we may need theistic allies, those that the public can relate to. Dr. Kenneth Miller is a Catholic. He is a professor of biology. He is a textbook author of biology. He was instrumental in the Dover case, in which the judge ruled that intelligent design was really just creationism in disguise. He is helping squelch many of the fundamentalist voices by showing other religions that one can still be a believer and still accept evolution. This may be a solution to helping get people to get more involved in understanding and accepting science, is by having allies. And again, this goes back to science being culturally relevant. I think this is a perfect example of this. Of course, he won't convince all people. Some will just put him on the fringe of Christianity. However, there may be some who respect him as a spiritual person and will listen to what he has to say. And I think this is a good idea. In fact, Kenneth Miller is very well known for this quote: "I do not believe in a God that would try to deceive me." And I love that one because what he's referencing, of course, is that the evidence for evolution is just so obvious and it's just so prevalent that it's just, he just cannot believe that God would set everything up to make it look like it didn't happen. He doesn't think that he'd deceive him like that. So I think finding more theistic allies out there in the field would be a really good way to move forward. Next slide. In conclusion, the public acceptance of science appears to be affected at some of our most basic and foundational levels. Though nothing really makes sense without an understanding of biology to a biologist, many people are perfectly fine rejecting it and just moving on. But this tells us that if we want people to understand and accept science, that some new approaches may need to be undertaken if we're to gain acceptance of the sciences. New methods of Socratic dialogue, new reference materials, religious cultural peers, things that we talked about earlier. The study by Min-Soo Ha and his colleagues may give us some insight on how maybe we can touch people more emotionally. Science, to many people, it does appear to be very cold and callous and withdrawn and not something they can really relate to. Perhaps we should change this. Next slide. Conclusion part 2, solutions. science may have to become more theologically and culturally relevant, as was mentioned on the previous slide. Science pedagogy may have to be modified to include much more Socratic dialogue rather than just rote instruction, so that students can develop that aha moment, that feeling of what's right in their gut about the science being presented. Science may have to become a little bit more humble in its approach. I have been into a number of seminars in which scientists they have an absolute stance on things that offends the religious, and they may be correct. But I think if we are more open and have more Socratic dialogue, then we can get more feedback. And again, we need to put more theistic evolutionists and theists that accept many of these sciences that creationists and fundamentalists might have trouble with, and provide that, give them that resource, and that might help. So all in all, the public acceptance of science, it seems like the conflict between creationism and it will not go away anytime soon. But again, with the efforts of Kenneth Miller and other theistic evolutionists out there, and new ways that the public understanding of science professionals are working on to teach science to those who have issues with it, I think that we'll probably move forward in getting there one day. But unfortunately, not very soon. Thank you for watching this presentation. I hope you learned something, and I'm curious about what are some of your ideas about this issue, and do you think it may not be as widespread as I'm probably posting here? Are there less issues? Is it really the fact that people are really kind of like putting religion and science in two different spheres and not really crossing them over? Are these some of the issues we're having? But feel free to ask me any questions you might have, and I'll try my best to respond to those. Thank you very much.